Absolutely. Oops. Can everyone hear me? Hello?
Oh, sorry about that. I had paused the recording accidentally and I just started it again.
You said that might happen. So I wrote the book for a number of reasons. I really wanted to raise the curtain on diplomatic life because for most people who aren't in the service, it's shrouded in secrecy. I think there's still this held viewpoint of martini swilling pinstripe types who don't seem to be doing much, or it's very hazy what they're involved in, unless it's consular or other more high profile jobs. I also wanted to really sort of give an insider's guide into the places we did go on posting to, because I think we are given such a privileged opportunity on posting in that we're not tourists, but we're also not like permanent residents of that country with, all of the sort of cultural and historical baggage that could come with that. And so we have this absolutely unique opportunity to meet a lot of people from these places, to have unique events that we attend. It's a viewpoint that I think is rare for most people. And I wanted to offer that as a guide because that's what I love the most. I also wanted to give a clear-eyed look at what that life is like, both the good, the bad, and thirdly, the ugly. Mostly it's fantastic, as we all know, but there are challenges for kids. There's challenges for spouses. And I wanted people to really understand what that was like through storytelling and hopefully humorous stories. And I guess also it's a love story to the Foreign Service, because I have to say that I adored just about every nanosecond of it. I had so much fun, as did John. And so I wanted to offer that. And I guess also more personally, I wanted to reflect on what that life had given me, and where I'd come from, where I was going. And it was very cathartic in its way, because I started reflecting on what drew me to it so personally and so deeply. And at first I had thought it was because I was this grand adventurous, ready to climb the mountains and swim the seas and, be like one of those 1930s women pilots. And I realized as I thought about it that I was more about escaping from than going to. And I come from not an easy childhood. And John kind of felt the same way. We were sort of escaping. We were escape artists. And I suspect a lot of us are like that. There's a psychological draw to bringing us overseas. And, that came out for me as I reflected during that journey of writing the book. Anyways, before going any further, I thought that I would read one of the stories, which is in the Turkey chapter. That was our second to last posting. And I will just start. My cell phone rang just as I was slipping on my running shoes, about to set off to the gym for my morning workout. It was John. Sweetie, 2 Canadian movies have won awards at the Malatya Film Festival. That's nice, I replied with disinterest. Well, you see, the sad thing is the winners can't be there and won't get their cash prize if they aren't represented at the ceremony. We're swamped at the office and no one can get away. John waited for me to respond, the silence dragging. Finally, in a wheedling tone, he said, "Would you go, darling?" Exasperated, I asked when the event would be held and learned it was that night. I have a life, I barked, along with a few other choice words. I couldn't just drop everything to go pick up a couple of awards from a place I've never heard of. But you'll love it there, John interrupted. It's by the sea. You can go snorkeling. I was stopped in my tracks. If there's anything I love, it's the sea and swimming. This might not be such a bad idea. Sensing a change in my mood, John seized his advantage. It's all arranged. You'll be picked up at the airport and the organizers have assigned you an interpreter. I failed to take note that all had been settled before I'd even agreed to go. It was a mad scramble packing and getting to the airport. I first realized all was not well when the ticket agent informed me that the flight to Malatya was fully booked and that I would have to fly instead to a neighboring town. What could I do? Landing an hour later in some strange city with an unpronounceable name, it came as no surprise to find no welcoming committee anywhere in sight. However, a message had been left directing me to take a taxi to a meeting point an hour away. Minutes later, I found myself bumping along a dirt road riddled with potholes, comforting myself with the thought of a soothing swim at my journey's end. Disembarking at a deserted petrol station, I stood by the side of the road looking for signs of life, other than the 2 street dogs keeping me company. In what seemed an interminable wait, a car finally appeared on the horizon, screeching to halt before me in a cloud of dust. An attractive young woman jumped out from the passenger seat, asked if I was the ambassador's wife, and then told me to sit with her in the back. Now this is more like it, I thought. Sevgi, a vivacious brunette, turned out to be my interpreter. Good company, she spent several minutes extolling the virtues of the Malatya Film Festival, which I learned had attracted high-profile personalities in the past. This year, the American film director, John Sayles, was headlining the ceremony. Wow, that's exciting, I enthused. And to think I'll also get to swim in the sea here, I grinned. Looking confused, my translator leaned forward and spoke in Turkish to the driver. They both started to snigger nervously. Speaking slowly, as if to a dimwit, she turned toward me and pronounced loudly, "There is no sea here." Seeing my jaw drop, she added helpfully, "However, we do have a dam." And then, consolingly, "and delicious apricots." Convinced that she was making a monumental mistake, I shook my head. No, you don't understand. My husband told me that Malatya is by the sea. I have my snorkeling equipment and my baggage. I also spoke slowly and loudly to be understood. It turned out that there had been a mistake, all right, but not by the translator. It turns out there is no sea anywhere within 500 kilometers of Malatya. Pulling out my cell phone, I punched in John's number, only to have the call go unanswered. The rat. A welcoming committee awaited me with broad smiles in the hotel lobby. The general manager escorted me to my large suite, mentioning along the way that I needed to be ready in half an hour for dinner downstairs. That's not going to happen, I thought. I was darn well going to have a swim first. I quickly changed into my bathing suit, grabbed my snorkel and mask, and headed to the pool. Well, I may as well have taken a bath as the pool was minuscule. Regardless, I plunged in and was 5 minutes into my laps when I noticed a worried-looking hotel employee beckoning me to the side. Apparently, I was to have dinner with the governor of Malatya, and he was waiting. I rushed to the elevator, dripping and still wearing my swimming mask, much to the bewilderment of an elderly couple who backed nervously into a corner. Back in my room, I started to dress, only to realize that the elegant black gown I had packed featured a very low-cut V-neck. I hadn't a clue what one wore to the opening of a film festival, but I knew that my choice of apparel was far from appropriate in a Muslim country where women were expected to dress modestly. Having no alternative, however, I dabbed on some makeup and headed downstairs. A special table had been reserved in a corner of the restaurant. My interpreter was already there, along with the governor and 2 other gentlemen whose functions were never explained to me. Sitting down, I was met by polite smiles and a mantle of silence. I've always felt uncomfortable in situations where no one is speaking. my reaction being to prattle away so as to fill the void. Tell me, Governor, I chatted nervously, what are the main exports of Malatya? Pausing, I then added, aside from apricots. I had learned from the interpreter that 90% of the world's apricots were grown and shipped from Malatya, so this seemed a good starting point. I don't know, he responded in Turkish to my interpreter. Somewhat bewildered, I persevered. Has the Syrian refugee crisis had an impact on this region? My interpreter listened to his response, then said to me with a shrug, he doesn't know. In desperation, I turned to sports, asking about the local soccer team. I didn't need a translator to understand that he didn't know the answer to that either. Exasperated, my interpreter leaned forward and whispered that the governor was not actually from Malatya. The rest of the dinner passed in silence. I took out my cell phone and messaged John. You're an idiot. There is no sea here. Just as I was looking for an excuse to escape, a festival staffer announced that it was time to leave. We were hustled out of the hotel, and to my distress, I was escorted to the governor's vehicle. It appeared that he was my date for the evening. The town car brought us to the entrance of the festival building, where I could see a long red carpet and a phalanx of paparazzi. As soon as we got out of the car, flashbulbs exploded, momentarily blinding me, and the air was filled with the sounds of pop, pop, pop. Someone guided me to a spot in front of the shutterbugs, and it suddenly dawned on me that I was supposed to pose. Uncertain what to do, I momentarily stood frozen, like the proverbial deer in the headlights. Well, all right, I thought, let's do this. Putting a hand on my hip, I carefully placed one foot forward, cocked my head sideways, and pouted. I'd seen actresses do this on the red carpet at the Oscars, so I figured it was good. Quickly, I also placed an arm in front of my overflowing bosom. That probably ruined the effect, but I had no intention of having my breasts dominate the photos. I was then led to the front row of the auditorium where the governor waited. We both donned fake smiles of delight. There was no getting away from the man. A few seats over, I noticed John Sayles, who acknowledged me with a nod, undoubtedly wondering who the dazed-looking blonde was with the Jane Mansfield breasts. Looking around, I noticed a large camera crane along with several other cameras. As I tried to make sense of these, a festival employee came over and announced that the ceremony was about to begin and that it was being televised live across the country. In Turkish, of course. I would be called upon to accept the award for Best Actress, which had been won by someone called Rachel, who had starred in a Canadian drama called War Witch. Seeing my look of horror, he told me not to worry. I would be given a signal when it was time to go on stage. Again, the following refrain went through my mind. I'm going to kill John Holmes when I get home. As the ceremony progressed, I waited nervously for my cue, my legs shaking and my heart thumping up a storm. Then, when I heard my name called, I took a deep breath and muttered to myself, fuck it. I strode confidently onto the stage and up to the podium. I smiled broadly to the audience and the cameras, paused for a moment, then shouted into the microphone, Merhaba, nasılsınız? Then proceeded to use every Turkish word and phrase I knew. Çok güzel, dur, gel, geliyorum, gidiyorum, cami, süt, ne kadar, baklava. In other words, very good, stop, come, I'm coming, I'm leaving, mosque, milk, how much, dessert. Each utterance was met by enthusiastic applause, belying the nonsense coming out of my mouth and attesting to the inherent kindness of Turks and their love of hearing Turkish spoken by foreigners. I had them at merhaba. Switching to English, I told the audience that Rachel had asked me to convey how thrilled she was to receive the coveted Crystal Apricot Award. This is the first major recognition of her work, for which she is deeply grateful, I said. I declined to mention that we had never spoken, let alone met. I learned afterwards that she had already won that year's Best Actress Award at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City. But desperate times called for desperate measures. As I walked back to my seat, John Sayles smiled and said, "Good speech." That's it. Hello?
Thank you. No, that. I think most of us who've been on postings can definitely relate to that, throwing every word you know in your language, in the language of the place, and hoping for the best. That certainly was an experience I had in Poland on a regular basis. But
Sure.
But I mean, I definitely, yes. I think that most of us can really relate to what you're saying, and we appreciate hearing stories that are familiar like that, told in, you know, in such a, like in such a positive way. You know, this is an important thing for people to understand about the life of people in the foreign service. I think that you are, you know, you're called on to adapt to all kinds of situations, and it's not always about, you know, danger, but it can certainly get your heart rate up, you know, in those kinds of circumstances. So I'm just wondering, I'm not seeing, I wonder if people want to ask questions. I haven't seen anybody type anything in the Q&A or the chat. But if you'd like to ask Carol a question, you could either use the Q&A thing, or you could raise your hand. And what we'll do is I will make you a panelist, so that she can see you and you can talk. So she's not talking into the void here in the webinar format. So does anybody have any questions or comments that they would like to make? Maybe as we're sort of getting going, I could ask you a little bit more about, I mean, I noticed that, I don't want to sort of focus on negative things, but I noticed that, you know, in the blurb on the back of your book, there's a really nice blurb there from Sir David Redaway, who talks about, who is the former British High Commissioner to Canada and ambassador to Ireland and Turkey. And he has, you know, very nice things to say about the book. Carol tells a terrific story with verve and perception. If Bridget Jones had been a diplomat or a diplomat's spouse, and thank the Lord she wasn't, some of these anecdotes would certainly have featured in her diaries. And then he goes on, you know, he says a number of nice things, but then he adds, you know, no one would ever accuse Carol and John when he got a word in of that. And I was struck by that. I mean, it's obviously a very positive commentary on the book. The guy obviously likes you, but yet, you know, I mean, maybe it's just a Brit thing, you know, has to get that little comment in there about like getting a word in. And this is something that I observe. I mean, I'm single and don't have any dependents, you know, who come with me on post, except for my little dogs. But it's something I really noticed in the diplomatic community, that they're like, it's in some ways it's kind of a holdover from a remote era, you know, from the 1950s, if we're lucky sometimes, in the way that we look at spouses and the way, you know, and accompanying people. So I'm wondering if maybe if you could comment a little bit on that, and how, you know, do you have any, I think a few names on the list of people who I think might be in that situation or be having spouses accompanying them. Do you have any comments or tips on how to navigate some of that, and how we might change it maybe a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it was very perceptive of you to pick that up on the write-up in the back. I should preface what I'm going to say by indicating that David is a very, very good friend. And we have a very teasing relationship, the two of us. And so this is very much in keeping to, you know, what he would say to tease me. But I put that particular quote because I have quite a few endorsements, and I put this one in the back. I like the reference to Bridget Jones, but I also wanted people to see that reference to the long-suffering and impressively resilient husband, and no one would ever accuse Carol and John when he got a word in of that. I wanted to underscore how challenging it can be for a spouse. I mean, you are dealing in a world of huge freaking egos. And I remember our first posting going to receptions and being absolutely floored by the fact that as soon as people knew I was someone's spouse, they would look over my shoulder to see if there was someone more important to speak to. And when you don't have a strong sense of self and identity and confidence in those early years, it's really quite devastating. And so I guess it struck me that I needed to really sort of build up my own sense of identity. Like, it was really important that I have a separate life and world and identity that was apart from John's world, although I loved it and every second of it, but I needed to have something of my own. And you talked about the different things I did. I guess what I would say, especially to young foreign service officers and spouses in particular, is, you know, we go in those early years on posting with that box in our head, most of us, of that the only thing that will make me happy on this posting is if I get a job, if I work. That's the end all, right? And I recognize how important that is. I felt the same way. But some postings don't offer you that. And if you can sit back and say, what does this time and place give me that I should take advantage of? It opens up a glorious new world. I set up a scholarship program for women when I was in Jordan. Over 55 women have gotten their undergraduate and their master's degrees. And it's an ongoing thing with a very strong board. I am really proud of that. That was a very good use of my time. And being the wife of actually helped. I hated that label, but it was useful. I did the Cordon Bleu. I'm a graduate of the Cordon Bleu. I wrote a book. I was a furniture designer in the Philippines. I was selected from a small group, and I was the only non-Filipino who got to present her designs to Martha Stewart when she came to the Philippines. I did all kinds of stuff. And that was great. And that's what I would encourage people to do. I don't know if that answers the question in a long-winded way, but it is what it is.
No, it's great. And you know, and I think it's also like it parallels the advice that like I hear people give, and that, you know, that I give to foreign service officers as well, is to be open-minded, you know, and to try to like find what's interesting about where you are, rather than have rigid ideas about like, okay, if I'm not posted to New York, this job is not worth doing. You know, think about what's interesting about other things, and about what you can get out of your experience. So no, I think that's good advice. I have to admit, as you know, the single working person, sometimes kind of envied the accompanying people, because they got to go and do some of those great experiences, and meet with because sometimes I think our spouses and other members of the community are more in the community than we are as diplomats. We are like as the CBS, you go into an office that's pretty much designed for your needs every day. And then you're in the diplomatic community, sometimes you're not really experiencing the local life the same way. And sometimes I envy that. And sometimes I was like, oh, thank God, thank God I have, that's not most of my time. But Judith, I thank you for accepting my invitation as a panelist. I saw that you made a comment, and I'm just wondering if you wanted to chime in and mention your experiences as well, or add to a question. The couple people have asked questions, but they didn't accept my panelist invitation, so I will.
Hi, Judith. It's good to see you.
Sorry, you're muted.
Now I'm muted. Thank you, and thank you for asking us to join. This is super. I'm actually in England right now with my kids, which I arrived 8 days ago. I still don't have my clothes, but at least I'm here anyway, which is good. But I think mainly I enjoyed your stories, Carol. Of course, many of them are the same that we've all had, etc. But the one that kind of intrigued me, and which is why I kind of piped in, was you saying, "John, I'm going to kill you," because I mean that I think seems to be the general refrain. And my comment was that mine was, "Jim, I'm going to kill you," but Mine was that, we had done, of course, as many of you know, Jim was a Middle Eastern specialist. So we did almost all our postings there. And I can remember coming back from Baghdad, and then he walked down the sidewalk one night coming into the house. And as soon as I saw him, I thought, shit, I know what he's going to say. So I met him by saying, I'm not going. I've had it. I'm not going. I'm staying. And he said, no, just listen to me. And I said, no, I'm not going, to Iran now. Maybe that's where they want us to go after having done Iraq. I'm not going there. And he said, no, it's not Iran. I said, and I'm not going back to Saudi Arabia. And he said, no, it's not Saudi Arabia. And then he started to say something else. And I said, you know what? The only place you will convince me to go back to is Egypt. And he said, good, we're going in 3 weeks.
That sounds like Jim. He was very convincing.
Yeah, absolutely. But I thought, as you use the word, you, buddy, I don't want to go. Anyway, I did. I then was probably like you did many times, a little bit realistic, saying, we're not going till we know we have a house. I'm not going till we know the kids are in a school. I'm not blah, 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 blah. But anyway, so I'm looking forward to reading your book.
That's knowing Jim too. To me, I think that story is one of the the definitions of diplomacy, right? Yes. To do something and then convince the other person that it's at least partly their idea, so he gets you to say that first, and then it's like, great.
But I should have known better after 30 years.
Judith, I just want to add on to that because you raised something important. I believe strongly, as I'm sure you do, that lifestyle will not work unless it's a partnership. You better sit down and discuss these postings together. They have more of an impact on the spouse and the kids in many ways than on the employee.
Very true.
There's a lot more adapting that needs to take place. It can be very lonely. And so whenever I've seen instances of a spouse being dragged along somewhat unwillingly, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for the marriage, and That's it doesn't work for the posting. So this is a team effort, and the kids need to be involved too. The kids need to have a say. Yeah. They need to feel that they're part of that whole process.
Absolutely. And I think in a way, I'm going to use the word pay for it because that's how I somehow feel sometimes. That, of course, as you know, Jim's not with us anymore. But my kids also got so used to being abroad that they decided to marry foreigners and live abroad.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of stuck. I feel stuck, but they keep saying move over here, etc. But for them, it was just natural to. One met her future husband, his future wife in Turkey. The other one met one here in a pub. And that was it. But for them, it was natural. They're very Canadian, like many third culture kids are. But they're much more comfortable overseas, which is kind of sad for me now that, I'm that far away, but you learn to live with it. And just COVID's been a pain, that's all.
No kidding. I tried in the book to look at that life to a certain extent from different perspectives. And I did look at it to a certain extent from the kids' perspective and how challenging it could be. We know with the research on third culture kids that, there's high rates of drug use and suicide, and, it can be extremely challenging. And Pamela, I just want to respond to what you said about this great gig, which is, being the spouse of. I'll give you an example that's interesting. When we were in Jordan and I set up the scholarship program, I was able to phone the Minister of Education's office and get an appointment with him like the same day. John didn't have that kind of access. And I knew the family. I knew his spouse. I knew him. I socialized with them. So I had amazing entrees. And Jordan allowed that. It was the kind of country that was very receptive to that kind of thing. And as you know, Judith, from Arabic countries, et cetera, they're very hospitable. So yeah, I did. I had amazing access. John used to tease me, can you get me a meeting like with the Minister of Education? Because I'm not having any luck.
Well, definitely. From the perspective of an officer, I know that like spouses were in Warsaw, in my last posting in particular, were a huge asset to the community. We had some pretty high-powered accompanying people, and I used to go to them, for help with things quite often, and sometimes, they did have those connections. And I think it's a resource that we undervalue, and that we don't, we go back and forth in the level of sort of responsibility that we want to have, or the level of involvement that we expect, and there seem like I've observed, I don't want to say how, I'm at the point now where I don't want to say how long I've been in the Foreign Service, but over my time, I've observed several waves of, spouses are part of the community and we should be, taking advantage of them more, if it's possible, or everyone is independent now, and so you can't, like, people should expect to work, and you shouldn't expect to necessarily be engaging with spouses as it's as part of like the embassy. And I've seen several waves of the way that is kind of been handled. And now as president of PAFSO, I mean, periodically, we look at these issues, and I'm always trying to think like, okay, where is our line? Like on the one hand, I mean, PAFSO's is a membership-based, dues-paying organization, and our mandate really is, the employee who, and as a worker, and dealing with the employer-employee relationship, but it's our lives. The employer-employee relationship touches so much more of our lives than just the average public service person, based in Canada, that I do feel like there is there's a way we should be getting involved and trying to support, but I'm not quite sure where that is, to be honest. And I would welcome comments from you and from the rest of the group. If you ask a question, I'm going to try to promote you to a panelist, but you don't have to say yes. And on that kind of thing. But before we go on, there are a couple of specific questions. There's one specific question from Pratima about what does the triple sex in the book refer to? Can you give us a clue? And then there was another one about your writing process, and did you keep a diary, or how did you hold on to all of these great stories, and when you went that went into the book?
Yeah, well, triple sex, you want to know, you got to buy the book, right? Or send Uncle Guido to break your
That's the teaser.
Triple sex is really about misunderstandings that arise when you don't know a language. And when we were in Turkey, I taught the butler Byram, who is a former footballer, very muscular, and how to make cosmopolitans. And I'm sitting in the study, and he walks in, very happily with this tiny silver tray, this iced, glistening martini glass, as I'd taught him, with little globules of water, coming down the stem, and this fuchsia colored liquid. And he says to me proudly, "Madame, for you, I put extra triple sex." I'm like, yes, works for me. Give me the triple sex. Certainly not about my sex life, because that would be a very short read, but we digress. Now, the second question was about my writing process. No, I did not keep diaries. These stories were so ingrained in my mind, and I'm sure, and I've forgotten millions of them, but, and they were dinner party fodder. I would trot these out and talk about them. So it was just from memory. Yeah, I didn't keep a diary. And, I grappled with just how to write the book. I mean, should it be linear? Should it be chapter by chapter? And so I just started with a bunch of stories. I wrote stories. And then I had an editor look at it. And she said, you need a narrative arc, which was new to me. She said, memoirs are about show and tell. Show you're really good at. People see what you saw. They're very aware of, that experience, but tell goes deeper and talks about what the impact of those events were on you and your psyche and all the rest. So it was, it was a very, very interesting process in putting the book together. It was very cathartic, and I would highly recommend that everybody write a memoir.
Excellent. Yeah, it's I did when I came back from Afghanistan in 2006. I took a year off and I wrote a memoir, but I realized that I could not publish it without getting fired. So so it's in a drawer. but it definitely it was a very, for me, I think if you are that kind of verbal person, it is a really good way of processing what happened to you, what you saw and everything. I'm not seeing more questions in the chat, so maybe could I ask you guys, what do you think, about from the PAFSO point of view? I mean, what do you think we could do, both as the association and as officers who, those of us who don't have spouses with us? Is there anything that we could do better to, be better members of the community, or to support this part of the community, as we're, people are going about this tough work, because really it is work. And I think acknowledging that is a big part of it. But anything else that you think we could be doing in practical terms?
Right. Judith, do you have anything to say?
Well, we were eternally grateful to PAFSO, as you know, or maybe Carol, you don't know, but certainly Pam knows. Jim was PAFSO president at one point. But we had trouble when I had got a job at that point at CCMD, the Canadian Centre for Management Development in Ottawa, and Jim was posted to Washington. And I just said, I'm not willing to go. I finally have got a job where I can get a pension, build up a few years of some pension, etc. I had one daughter in grade 12 at that point and another one in grade 10, and they'd kind of had it. So Jim went to Washington. But after about 4 years, I had some medical issues. He came home, we were kind of commuting back and forth, and he came home and he said, why am I doing this? Why are you here and I'm there? And, something could happen to you or whatever. So he went to HR and he said, I'd like to come home. I'm pulling out after 4 years. Well, they then set this whole process in the position about where he was going to have to repay all his SQ in Washington because they hadn't charged him because I was still back in Ottawa, etc. He was going to have to repay all the shipping costs going down to Washington and sending him back home. And he just went to PAFSO and he said, look, this is ridiculous. I've done 6 postings and I've extended in every single one of them when they've asked me to extend. Now I would like to short term it because of family reasons. And PAFSO was fantastic. So certainly as a spouse and our family, we would have survived it, but it would have been a big hit financially if PAFSO hadn't said, we will go to bat for you, don't be silly. And it was not only Jim, I think they were batting for, it was the whole family.
Right.
Yeah.
One practical and very important thing I think PAFSO should do is extend the pensionable time abroad that we're given. In other words, I left on posting with John when he went to Jordan and couldn't work at the embassy because John was head of mission. And I was able to pay back into my pension plan for 5 years, but I was limited to 5 years. In fact, overseas, there was probably 15 years. And I'm feeling that now. My pension is very minimal. And although I recognize that it was a conscious decision on my part to go, and I'm happy I did, I have no regrets whatsoever, I don't agree that we should be limited that way. So I would push PAFSO to look at that so that spouses can continue paying into their pension plan for the entire time that they're overseas. It shouldn't be limited to 5 years.
I second that.
There have been, so we're coming up on the review of the FSDs. And I know that over the years, there have been a few different ideas batted around for how to deal with some of these issues. And one of them is that perhaps there should be some kind of an allowance, attached to spouses, like to accompanying people, that at least would cover their pension contributions, while they're overseas. So like at least they could make, the equivalent to what they would have made in the previous year that they were working. There'd have to be some kind of rules in there, so that they were, reflecting what the person was doing, before. But I think that some of that kind of thing might be a way of dealing with it. There have also been ideas of that, maybe there should be an allowance attached, certainly to, people who are posted like at the program manager level and above, where maybe, it should be an allowance to hire somebody to help you. And it shouldn't necessarily be tied to, are you going with a spouse? But like, I know when I was in Warsaw as a single program manager, I felt it sometimes that, I didn't entertain at home very often, because I could, sure, I could get caterers and everything to do like the actual food, but I had to let the caterers in, and I had to watch out for the caterers, and I had nobody to help me with that. And there was not, from time to time I did that, I did hire someone, and it came out of my own pocket, which you can do from time to time, but not as regularly as your colleague who has somebody to help them. So there, then the person could, if they have a spouse, that money could go to the spouse who's playing that role, or they could hire somebody, from locally to help them. I mean, another idea that's come up is that, maybe the idea of having somebody accompany you, maybe it shouldn't necessarily be tied to, the traditional, like necessarily a romantic partner. Maybe everybody should be able to take one adult with them. And, is it really the department's business if you're sleeping with that person, or, what your relationship is? Maybe you should be able to take, you'd have to have some limits to say, okay, one person per assignment, or what, that you can't change every month and have a new person. But, that may be one way of kind of breaking some of this 1950s mentality that we still have, that we expect a certain level of dependence, and that we really expect people to give up a lot of their the normal things that Canadians have in order to be posted with a family,
And also, I beg you, I plead this case, remove from the lexicon the word dependence.
Yeah,
I find that so insulting and disrespectful. It drives me insane. And I wonder if it doesn't feed into a perspective. Pamela, I have 6 chats here. Oh,
excellent.
Oh, it's just.
Oh, so I think most of them I've read out, or we've responded to.
Okay, got you.
But I'm seeing anybody else have any
Come on,
comments?
people out there. There must be some questions.
I see John came to sneak in, and I tried to promote him to panelist, but he has not responded. So if he wants to come forward, maybe we could. You mean
the rat?
That's
in Turkey that day when I was in Malatya, he went down to the little Canada bar they had at the embassy, and he called out to one of the LES, Rama, Madame's in Malatya. And Rama came running over and said, Ambassador, you should have told me. We would have picked her up at the airport. The family would have shown her around. And John said, no, she didn't have time. She was going swimming in the sea. And just says, Ambassador, what sea? What are you talking about? And John figured out he'd confused Antalya with Malatya. And he looks down at his phone, and he's got 7 missed calls and 20 messages. The first one, you idiot. And from that day forward, all of our Turkish friends called Malatya by the sea. It's changed it.
Like it.
I wanted to say one of the interesting reactions I've had to the book has been from young women who have seen a kind of feminist undercurrent, which was not my intent, but which I found really interesting. And I loved that they saw that because, I hated being called the spouse of or the wife of. I mean, it's ironic that I put it in the title because I really grappled with that. And then I remember being really inspired by Michelle Obama when she went to the White House. And she made a conscious decision not to work while she was there. She wanted to support her spouse. She wanted to be there for her kids. And I had an epiphany, and I realized this was not disempowerment. It was, in fact, empowerment. The ability to make your own decisions based on what you need and where you are in the world at that time is an incredible gift, and it's very powerful. So yeah, I'm very glad to hear that there seems to be that underpinning.
Definitely, definitely. Well, when we were talking, we had a little chat before this last week, just so that I could get an idea of, what Carol was going to say and what questions to ask and so on and so forth. And I was struck when we were having our conversation about an experience I had, like when I was in Warsaw, my female ambassador left after 3 years, and a new man came, and he was, he was unaccompanied on that post. And honestly, I'd been there for 3 years, and I had been chargé for different periods, like including for the transition, between the two ambassadors. A couple times I'd been chargé when the ambassador was away, even during like high level visits and so on. And immediately my Polish colleagues at the first reception that the new ambassador hosted started talking to me about my husband. And I was like, do you really think that I would have been here for 3 years and not mentioned to you that I was married, or suddenly got married to my boss?
Yeah.
And it was people that I knew and who all of a sudden immediately just wanted to put me in that role. And I was like, it gave me just a little glimpse, of like, hey, come on, how insulting how weird that can be. They meant no harm, but it was just, they saw us together and they saw me, I knew the house because I had been there for other things. And so I was kind of, helping him greet people and so on. And it's like, oh, where's your husband is great. I'm like, it's not my husband. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. It gleaned on to me. It took a while, though, in working through my lack of confidence, that I just really needed to work at being myself. And that comedy humor went a long way. So I remember in Ghana going to a dinner, and I sat next to the deputy foreign minister. It was outside, hosted by American diplomats. And this guy had been to Oxford. He had a very plummy British accent. And I kept trying to find some conversational middle ground with him. And he obviously found me stultifyingly boring. And I just, after a while, sort of gave up and started talking to the woman on my right. And at some point, he sort of put his hand on my arm and he said, "You say, what is the national dish of Canada?" And I said, "You're looking at it, honey."
Ah, beautiful.
"You're looking at it, honey." And that was it. Like, he was my new best friend, and he picked me up to go to markets. He was a big foodie. And, I sort of turned it on itself. And I remember in the Philippines, our last posting, we went to some odd dinner that started at 5:30. Like, who eats dinner at 5:30? And we all had to wear big labels with our names. And of course, I'm freaking, Carol, wife of Canadian ambassador. I don't even think Carol was written on it, like wife of Canadian ambassador. And normally I would just seethe, like, fuck this. And I thought, no. And we had to sit at this big round table, and then a microphone went around, and we had to sort of introduce ourselves. So, it goes around, I'm so-and-so, and I do this, and I grow vegetables, and, whatever. And it comes to me, and I stood up, and I went, "Summertime, and the living is easy." Like, totally inappropriate, but I'm like, I don't care. I feel like singing. I'm going to sing. And the host became a really good friend. We started hanging out. He was much older guy, and he was a lot of fun. But I think if you can just sort of turn it on yourself, or turn it on itself, be yourself, be humorous as much as possible. I don't know, you establish some fantastic friendships, and the haze kind of dissipates. And I think people start seeing you for who you are. You try not to embarrass the country. That's important. True. And I say that jokingly, but I'm serious. Yeah, that's how I handled it. Not always great. but
no, that does sound great. There's a question in the chat. Somebody just asking about the word, the word dependent and what alternative we could use. And I apologize for using that word myself, but it's like I don't have another word for what would cover the range of accompanying people. I guess maybe that's a reasonable thing. Accompanying family. Or
I always said to John, I much prefer she who must be obeyed.
Yes.
It worked really well for me. Yeah, accompanying family member, although that's a bit cumbersome, but anything but, please, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I don't know what other foreign services use. There's also
been, you can say trailing spouse, right? Or trailing dependents, which I think is even worse.
That sounds like I'm holding on somehow.
Yeah, like you're somehow you're following, and they might go faster than you, you know, or like yeah. To me that one bothers me. Well, bothers me on people's behalf even more. Yeah. But yeah, I think we do need to work on some better language to describe the situations that people are in. I am not seeing any more questions. I'm not seeing John coming forward to say hi, so we'll leave him in peace to hide. And there he is. He has his hand up. Okay, I will. Here we are.
Where's my honey? Oh my goodness. John Holmes. As I live and breathe, I can't get rid of him. That's the thrilling.
Sorry, John, I couldn't resist.
No, I know you couldn't resist. First of all, thanks very much for those comments at the beginning. I really appreciate that. And it was great working with you. I think probably my Middle East team from 10 years ago was probably one of the best teams I've ever had. But, you know, I declined your invite a little bit earlier because, you know, I'm very mixed about this whole process because I'm very proud of Carol for having written the book, and I think it's going to be a big success. But it's really exposed the fact, something that I've tried to hide for many, many years, which is, you know, in this power couple of us, she's the star. And now it's coming out in the damn book and all these interviews she's given, you know, and I've ridden on her coattails for almost 40 years, you know, and damn, it's all coming out right now. So, you know, mixed emotions about all of this. But one thing, you know, I think it's in the book too. I've read the damn book so many times, I can't remember what's in and what's out, but, you know, just in terms of furthering not only our careers, but also Canadian interests. You know, we did a dinner in Indonesia at the residence, and we got the chair of president and CEO of one of the big airline companies. They eventually, it happened just after we left, but they eventually bought hundreds of millions of dollars worth of that old Canadian standard Bombardier jets. And the only reason he came to dinner, you know, all the other ambassadors were jealous because he never went to people's houses. He knew Carol. He had met her a couple times. She had told him about food and cuisine and fusion. And he only came to the dinner because of her. He only got interested in Bombardier because she kept talking about it. And, you know, the rest was history. So anyway, it's a partnership. And as I said, I've benefited from riding her coattails for quite a while.
The little airplanes coming out of the soup, the little soup dishes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And it's, I'm glad you have good memories of the Middle East team as well. But you know, I think it really does make a difference in just what I've observed being on postings myself, how the employee views their partner and how they present their partner and talk about their partner at work, you know? And I mean, if anybody is out here thinking about that, it's like, I think that's one of the lessons that I kind of take away from some of this is that, you know, it was always clear to us that you really saw Carol as a key part of your success in the job, and and as a key person. And that doesn't always come across with every partnership that I've seen. And I think for foreign service officers, who are looking at going on posting, for the first time, or who are acquiring new accompanying people as they go, it's something to keep in mind, that your demeanor, I think, can really affect the experience that people are going to have. And, and the rest of us to be aware of how we're seeing people sometimes through a filter, maybe, that we're not always aware of. Yeah. So it's 10:01. So we normally we ask people for an hour of their time for these kinds of things. But if there are, if you're willing to stay, if there are more questions, we can stay a little bit longer. Did you guys have Carol, did you have any last words any final things to say before we sign off? I'll just to give everybody a minute to chime in the chat if they.
I would just ask that for anyone who reads the book, I would love some feedback. It's a lot of fun to hear what people have said. I have a website which is Bujeau.com, and people can leave comments there. That would be really of interest to me. I'd love to have that conversation. It's one of the great things about, painting a painting or writing a book. It's getting to hear what people see into it, which can be quite different from what you expected or intended.
Excellent. And Carol is too polite to say this, but you can order the book in the chat. It's through the publisher, and I got to tell you that the book comes fast. If you order your copies and you have them in 3 or 4 days, so in time for Christmas, for that foreign service or interested foreign service person on your list. And Carol, are you going to have ebooks? I noticed I didn't see on the publisher's thing that there was an e-version available.
It's not available yet, but it will be. And I imagine it's going to be on Amazon as well, right? You got to talk to my agent over there, Mr. Holmes. It will be on Amazon. Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah. The publisher is looking, I think, early in the new year, so it'll be out as an ebook. And the other thing I wanted to say is that, please buy the book. And if you're in the neighborhood of New Edinburgh, you can buy it from me, which I prefer because then I keep the cash and I just tell Carol, I sold 2 books today, when in fact I sold 10. But the other thing which you can all do, which costs you absolutely nothing, is next time you're in a bookstore, just say, hey, by the way, do you have this book? And that generates a little bit of interest from the bookstore owners. So appreciate that too.
Excellent. Thanks very much. So maybe with that, I guess we will sign off and say thank you very much for this really interesting discussion. Both of you, all of you, and Judith, thanks for joining in.
Pam, you forgot the raffle. Aren't you giving away the book?
No. So you know what? I think we're going to do that after, if that's okay. Just because I need to look at my emails. So we're going to number all the emails who came in, and then I will call Carol and ask her to pick a number out of a hat or pick a number at random, and then you will get the book. So
and you're back in town. Get in touch.
Carol, I live around the corner from you. When I've read the book, let's get together for coffee. I would love to chat.
I'd love that. All right.
Thanks, Pam. Bye.
Things are